So I'm always going to look at it because there's new ways of thinking, there's new technologies, there's new information that comes, and we want to be able to adjust and iterate on that.
My name is Matt Reiner, managing partner at Capital Investment Advisor, CEO of Wellness Strategies, an author, podcast host, and also a speaker to the wealth management community. My mission is to help every family in this country have access and be served by a human financial advisor. That we all have to live in the moment and not try to force progress too quickly. Let it happen and commit to a long-term strategy in your life, in your business, and in your investment portfolio.
And now, your host and my dad, Matt Reiner.
Welcome back to the FutureProof Advisor. Today we're exploring what happens when we mistake activity for progress and why the most innovative thing you might do this year isn't adding something new, but finally finishing what you started. Here's something that nobody tells you about innovation. It's exhausting. Not the good kind of exhausting, like the feeling after you solved a complex client problem or finished a meaningful project. I'm talking about the bone-deep fatigue that comes from constantly starting things you never finish. You know, I was in a conference room a few months ago when someone finally said it out loud, and I was super proud of them for saying it. We are experiencing change fatigue. You know, my first instinct wasn't pride, it was pushback. We're not changing too much, is what I said. We're evolving, we're innovating. This is what being future-proof looks like. But something in the way the room went quiet made me pause. And it was in that pause I realized they were right, just not in the way I thought. See, we've been taught that resistance to change is the enemy. And I've even said it before, and I somewhat still believe it, but this opened my eyes to another perspective. You know, we think that if people are tired, it's because we're moving too fast, asking too much, disrupting those comfortable rhythms of, quote, how we've always done it. But what if the exhaustion isn't from the change itself? What if it's from something we rarely talk about? The suffocating weight of unfinished change. Today, we're going to explore why slowing down might be the fastest way forward, why the answer to all of our biggest challenges probably isn't another tool, and why the most valuable skill that I believe in wealth management right now isn't about finding the next solution. It's about actually finishing the last one. So over the next half hour or so, we're going to dig into 5 critical insights that I've gotten from this research. First, we're going to explore why tools alone never create the efficiency gains we're chasing, and we're going to look at what actually does. Second, I'll walk you through a framework for defining your utopia before you buy your next piece of technology. Then we'll talk about why you need to separate exploring from exploiting and how to structure that separation without grinding your business and your day-to-day business to a halt. Then we'll examine why your barrier to adoption probably is not a training problem at all. And then finally, we'll look at how to structure pilots that actually work. Because the goal isn't just to test technology, it's to fundamentally rethink how you operate. But before we get into all of that, I need to tell you about the cloud storage incident that opened my eyes. Human nature loves shortcuts. Think about it. When was the last time you had just 15 minutes uninterrupted for deep thought? Not tactical thinking, not what's the next thing on my to-do list thinking, but actual strategic, blue sky, what could be possible thinking. If you're like me, you can't remember. We're stretched thin. We have too many demands on our attention. And in a world moving faster every single day, challenges keep arising despite or maybe because of how busy we are. So what do? We look for solutions, quick fixes, silver bullets, tools that promise to solve our problems with minimal effort. And here's the thing, the tools are not bad. They're actually incredibly valuable. But without scope, without context and a plan, they fall flat time and again. We struggle to see the value and the return on the investment. We bolt them on to existing processes and wonder why nothing fundamentally changes. We add them to workflows that were already broken and get frustrated when things somehow get worse. The merry-go-round continues. The challenges persist. The tools do not deliver. And we don't have time to stop and analyze what went wrong. So what do? We just find another tool and move on. But what if the answer isn't another tool? What if the answer is finally spending time rethinking the process itself? A year ago, I championed moving our team from server-based storage to the cloud. The case was obvious. It was time, easier access, better integration, lower cost. It was exactly the kind of forward-thinking move that should define a firm like ours at the size that we are. We picked the platform, we analyzed the options, we assembled a task force, we did the training, and then, as I tend to do, I moved on to the next idea. In my mind, the hard part was done. I had identified the problem, we had worked as a group to find the solution, and we secured buy-in on that solution with that team. The rest, that was just execution, someone else's execution. 12 months later, we were living in limbo. Half of our files were in the cloud, half were still on the server. Some people were using the new system, others were clinging to the old one like a life raft. And every project required explaining which system to use. Every new hire needed 2 sets of instructions. We hadn't adopted a new tool, we just layered confusion on top of the old way. And as I pushed for the next innovation, because that's what I do, I'm always looking for the next thing, I couldn't understand why people seemed so, drained. Change fatigue. That's what they said. And I pushed back. We're not changing too much. We're innovating. This is necessary. This is what separates the future winners from the firms that get left behind. But this team that was expressing this, they weren't tired of change. As hard as it was, they were tired of me. Specifically, they were tired of my pattern. Brilliant idea, incomplete follow-through, on to the next thing. I was an arsonist who kept lighting fires and walking away, genuinely confused about why everything smelled like smoke. It was in that conference room when someone finally said change fatigue out loud that I had this moment of uncomfortable clarity. The exhaustion wasn't about the pace of change. It was about the trail of unfinished initiatives, each one still requiring some level of attention, none of them delivering the promised results, all of them creating cognitive overhead for a team that was already stretched thin. They weren't afraid of change. They were drowning in the space between old and new, where both systems exist simultaneously and nothing works cleanly. And the person responsible for that drowning, that was me. And this is a lesson that continues to point time and time again, and a lesson that we all need to learn when it comes to innovation. So let me start, though, with the hardest truth that I've learned over the past year. Tools alone will never provide the efficiency gain we're all chasing. I know. And I know that's not what you want to hear, because believing a tool will solve our problems is so much easier than doing the actual hard work. And it's not like we aren't working hard, we are, but this requires a different type of hard work that we're used to. It's like buying expensive running shoes and expecting them to train you for a marathon. The shoes might reduce friction, but they can't build your endurance or teach you proper form. Our first instinct when we face a problem is to search for a tool, something to help us communicate more effectively, a platform to make us more organized, an AI to do the thinking for us. But the real solution, even when it's AI, is not a tool. It's never a tool. It's the process we are using, the perspective we have, the way we've always done things. And that's the hard work. That's the uncomfortable work because tools offer us shortcuts. Tools let us feel like we are making progress without actually changing anything fundamental. But here's what I've come to understand: efficiency gains don't come from the technology you adopt, they come from the process improvements you make before you adopt that technology. Let me give you an example from outside our industry. Toyota doesn't have better robots than other car manufacturers, but they have the Toyota production system, a fundamentally different way of thinking about manufacturing. I'm reading a book called American Icon, where Alan Mulally, who is a former CEO of Ford, went and tried to replicate what Toyota did because they have the right functionality, the right way of doing. They have the way of thinking. Not that they had more tools or technology than Ford, they had a better thought process than Ford. You know, the technology that Toyota has enables the process, but the process creates the value. Another solution or another example is DBS Bank in Singapore. They didn't become one of the world's best banks because they bought better software. They became the best because they completely redesigned their operating model from product-centric silos, meaning mortgages, banking, etc., to customer journey teams. The technology came second. The process redesign came first. The process redesign of how does that look, and then how do we then apply technology to enable that to work the way we envision it? You know, in our world in wealth management, this means that we need to stop looking at AI note takers as the solution to our meeting follow-up problem. The solution is rethinking our entire process for how client conversations turn into action items. Once we have done that work, once we've mapped out what an ideal system would look like, then we can evaluate which tool best enables that process. But if you just bolt on a note-taking AI onto your existing 30-step workflow, you haven't created efficiency. You've created a 31st step. Review the AI transcript for accuracy and hallucinations. The dominant failure pattern I see in our industry, with us included, is what I call tool bolting. It's a new technology emerges, leadership gets excited, we purchase the tool, we tell the team to use it, and then we wonder why nothing fundamentally changes. It doesn't change because we're trying to solve a process problem with a technology solution. We're putting new software on top of old workflows and expecting magic. The magic only happens when you do the hard work first, when you rethink the process itself, when you ask, if we were designing this from scratch today, knowing what we know now, how would we actually do it? And that's where real efficiency comes from. So if tools aren't the answer, where do you start? Start with clarity. Specifically, you start by defining what I call your utopia. This is an idea I borrowed from Amazon's working backwards methodology, and it's transformed how I think about change. Right? Here's how it works. Before you approve any resources, before you even start shopping for tools, you write out 2 documents. And I know what you're saying right now. Matt, I don't have time to write out 2 documents, especially the second one, which is a little bit lengthier. The first is a 1-page press release, but not a press release announcing what you are planning to do. It's a press release announcing what you've already accomplished from the client's perspective. And the client doesn't necessarily have to be the family you serve. It could be the person on your team, their perspective, because it's for them as well. So you answer, what problem did you solve? How does the client experience it? Why does it matter? This forces us to articulate the value proposition with absolute clarity. Not what the tool does, but what the outcome delivers. The second document is what Amazon calls the FAQ. It's a detailed internal document that anticipates every hard question from stakeholders. How will this change the team members' workflow? What are the compliance implications? What data does this need? How does it integrate with existing systems? What's the cost? How will we measure success? And I love this FAQ approach because it's essentially a pre-mortem instead of a post-mortem. It's allowing us to see what questions we need to think through before we present this solution and start to move down this path. We are proactively answering the questions that we know people will ask rather than scrambling to address them later. And it also helps keep us from getting defensive because we've already thought through the solution. It demonstrates that we have thought through this from multiple angles, not just from our own perspective and lens. But here's what makes this really powerful. Once you have that vision, that picture of utopia, you have the blueprint. We're no longer shopping for an AI tool. We're shopping for a workflow orchestrator with an API to our CRM that can execute step 4 of our new onboarding blueprint. That specificity matters because now your decision isn't based on what's shiny or what everyone else is using. It's based on what actually enables the future state that you're trying to create. Think of it this way. Clarifying your utopia is like setting a destination in your GPS before leaving the driveway. The questions people ask: how long will it take? What's the traffic like? Are there tolls? Those aren't obstacles. They're the route details that make the journey possible. Without that destination, you're just driving around hoping you end up somewhere useful. And I'll tell you from experience, that's exhausting for everyone in the car, my wife and kids especially. And let me tell you, from experience, that's exhausting from everyone in the car. Here's something that sounds obvious, but is incredibly hard to do in practice. You cannot explore what might be while you're busy exploiting what is. Research on organizational ambidexterity, the ability to simultaneously run your current business and explore new models, shows that firms must be capable of both. But they have to be separated. You cannot expect the same people who are executing your day-to-day operations to also reimagine those operations. It's not because they're not capable, but because when you're cooking Thanksgiving dinner, you can't simultaneously redesign the kitchen layout. You're too focused on not burning the turkey to imagine where the stove should actually go. And this is where the tool bolting trap comes from. It's an attempt to optimize the current process, to exploit what we're already doing while claiming we're exploring something new, but we are not. That's the thing. We're just trying to make the existing system marginally better, which is fine, but it's not transformation. It's not really real innovation. If we want to genuinely rethink how we operate, we need to dedicate time or dedicated people whose job is to connect the business to the opportunities, understands the business, and is able to find time to explore the opportunities. And this doesn't mean that we need a massive innovation team. It means we need to create protected space, whether that's a cross-functional working group, a quarterly offsite, or designated thinking time for key leaders. The critical point is this, that exploration work needs to happen separate from the daily execution. Here's how I've seen this work really well. Firms will create what's called a guiding coalition, a small team of people from different parts of the organization who are temporarily freed from some of the normal responsibilities to focus on redesigning a specific process. They spend 90 days mapping the current state, designing the future state, and building the implementation plan. They're not trying to run the business and reinvent it. They're freed up to do the reinvention work. Meanwhile, the rest of the organization keeps the current model running. There's no expectation that daily operations will suffer. There's no resentment about those people who get to play with new ideas while we do the real work. And when the guiding coalition comes back with their recommendations, they've done the hard thinking. They've answered the tough questions. They've built something that's actually implementable. That separation between today's operations and tomorrow's possibilities is what makes real change possible. And every organization is going to be slightly different. So it's a matter of leadership separating from the operations to think about how to execute this division of labor to allow for exploration and exploitation to occur at the same time. When a new tool fails to gain adoption, what's the first thing we do? More training. We schedule lunch and learns. We create video tutorials. We send reminder emails about the upcoming training session. And when adoption still doesn't improve, we assume people just don't want to change and we label them as resistors. But here's what I've learned. The barrier to change usually isn't a lack of training. It's the old process itself. Think about my cloud storage example. The training wasn't the problem. People understood how to use the cloud. They just didn't because the old system was still there, still accessible, still part of the muscle memory. We were asking people to voluntarily adopt a new way while leaving the old way fully functional. And human nature defaults to the familiar, especially when we're busy, when we're stretched, when we're stressed. The old process blocking new technology is like trying to use a smartphone while wearing thick winter gloves. The device works perfectly. You've watched all the tutorials, but the interface between human and tool was designed for a different reality. So, what's the solution? Well, you have to kill the old way. Not gradually, not eventually. You got to actually kill it. Set a date, communicate it clearly, and on that date, turn off access to the old system. Yes, this feels dramatic. Yes, people will complain. Yes, there will be a brief period of discomfort. But you know what else will happen? Adoption skyrockets. Because suddenly there is no choice. No, I'll switch next week. No, I'll use the new system for new files, but keep accessing the old one for everything else. The old way is gone. The new way is the only way. And people figure it out remarkably quickly when there's no alternative. This is what finally I had to do with our cloud storage. After a year of limbo, we finally set a date. We communicated it relentlessly. We made sure everyone had what they needed in the new system, and then we turned off the server. Was there grumbling? Of course there was. Did some people scramble at the last minute? Yes. Did our leadership team and team leads get frustrated because of all the questions and the strain? Of course. But within 2 weeks, it was done. Fully adopted, no more confusion about which system to use. No more duplicate files, no more half-finished migration. The barrier wasn't training. It was that we'd left the old way as an option. When we removed that option, the change happened. So I want to finally talk about pilots because most firms run them, us too, we run them completely wrong. I think that there's a lot of angst around especially around AI. Are we getting the ROI out of it? And the reality is I don't know if we have the best structure to determine whether we're getting the right ROI out of it because we're not running the right pilots. The typical pattern is that we identify a tool, we get excited, we select a small group to test it, we do a kickoff training session, we provide some FAQs, and then we let it go. 3 months later, we check in. How's it going? Everybody says fine, which usually means they've used it once or twice and then quietly reverted to the old way. Launching a pilot with just training and FAQs is like planting a garden, watering it once, and returning in 3 months expecting tomatoes. The goal was food. But without consistent care, without the structure of regular attention, all we get is weeds and regret. So here's how I think and view the way to structure a pilot that actually works. First, we need to set a time bound. Make it 90 days, not 30, not 6 months. 90 days is enough to really test something, but not so long that momentum dies. Second, recruit volunteers. Never focus a pilot on resistors. Find the people who are eager for a new way, and they will become your champions. Third, and this is critical, build in regular check-ins. Not, let me know if you have questions. No, I'm talking about structured check-ins. Weekly for the first month, then bi-weekly. And in those check-ins, you're not just asking, how is it going? You're asking specific questions. What worked this week? What didn't? Where did you get stuck? What would make this easier? You're setting, hey, let's work on this week. Holding accountability. Those are all important. Fourth, we're going to define success metrics up front. Not just are people using it, but what specific outcome are we trying to achieve? Time saved, error reduction, client satisfaction. Set those metrics. And then finally, and this is where I think most people skip, is at the end of the pilot, we need to create what I call a stop doing list. This is a list of everything from the old process that you're officially retiring. Not eventually, not gradually, right now. And maybe it's nothing. Maybe we kill the pilot. But if we're going to keep it, we're creating a stop doing list. And we communicate that list, we enforce it, and we make the new way the only way. Because the goal of a pilot isn't just to test technology, it's to prove that a new process works, and then to complete the transition to that process. A pilot without clear end state is just an experiment that never concludes. So I want you to try something right now. Think about your calendar for the next, look at it mentally. This is overwhelming for me. All the meetings, the commitments, the things demanding your attention. And now ask yourself, when in those 2 weeks do you have 60 uninterrupted minutes to think? Not to be tactical, not to solve immediate problems, but to actually think about your business, about where you're going, about what needs to change. If you're like me, you can't find it. And here's what that means. We're operating in pure reaction mode. We're putting out fires, handling crises, responding to demands, but we're not creating space to ask the harder questions. Questions like, if we had to rebuild this process from scratch today, knowing what we know now, what would we do differently? Or what incomplete changes are quietly draining our team's energy? I can think of many right now in our business. Or what's one thing we could stop doing that would create space for something better? And I can think of many, but then I think about the angst and the challenge. I don't have time to overcome that. Those questions require time, protected time, thinking time, not distracted time. And if we don't create this time, we'll keep doing what we've always done. We'll keep looking for tools to solve process problems. We'll keep starting initiatives we never finish. The most innovative thing we might do this year isn't adding something new. It's creating 60 minutes of uninterrupted thinking time and using it to finally finish what we started. We all know deep down that real change doesn't happen in motion. It happens in those rare moments when we stop moving long enough to think, to plan, to genuinely imagine something different. The doing matters. I'm not saying it doesn't. Of course it matters. But this is the reason why people stop after 90 days to do strategic thinking. Because the doing only has the impact we desire when it comes after the thinking. When it's grounded in a clear vision of where we're going. When it's part of a process we're actually redesigning. When we've really committed to seeing it all the way through. So my challenge to you is find 60 minutes this week. Not to add something new to your plate, but to look at what's already there. To ask yourself, what did I start that I never finished? What's sitting in that exhausting middle ground between old and new? And then what would it take to actually complete it? Sometimes the most innovative move isn't the next new thing. Sometimes it's finally finishing the last thing. So before you go, I want to hear from you. Click the link in the episode description to answer one question. What unfinished change is quietly draining your team's energy right now? I really am curious about it because I have many. I could put in a ton right now. And I suspect that we're all carrying more unfinished work than we actually realize. So with that, thank you for spending time with me today. It means the world. I'll never take it for granted. Go out there and be part of the change that betters our industry. Stay well, be well, keep on exploring.